Okay, good evening, everybody, and Happy New Year. And before I formally open the meeting, just a reminder that if you've got any electronic device, please switch it off. If you're a remote participant, would you ideally not use the camera facility because that has an effect on the quality of the meeting, and keep your microphone off unless you're actually asked to speak. The meeting may be recorded, and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use their Swale Borough Council or KCC laptop to participate virtually. If you join using the link on the website or on a mobile and tablet device, it is not always possible to identify you, and you may not be recorded as in remote attendance. So we'll now open the meeting. Welcome to this hybrid GPC meeting, including any visiting members attending remotely and members of the public. I also note that apart from visiting members remotely, we've got a number of visiting members actually in the Council Chamber: Councillor Palmer, Councillor Biert and Councillor Horton. The following officers are present. The Chief Executive, Larissa Reid, the Monitoring Officer, David Clifford, who's present remotely, Democratic Services, Joe Millard and Philip Davis, and Lisa Fillery, the Director of Resources. The evacuation procedure is well known to everybody. There's no planned evacuation, but I do have to say, from the Council Chamber, the closest emergency exit is the external fire escape that leads from the Council Chamber. The secondary exit, in the event that this were to be blocked, is staircase 1, the main staircase that leads down from the lift lobby. In the event of the alarm sounding, everybody must leave the building via the nearest safe available exit and gather at the assembly points at the far side of the car park. And the lifts may not be used in the event of an evacuation. Are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. There are no apologies this evening.
Okay, and can we agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of May, long ago, agreed? And are there any declarations of interest for this meeting? Councillor Whiting.
Mr. Chairman, there is a reference in item 6 to changes relating to those who have private rental properties for rent. I have some private rental properties for rent, so I'd appreciate it if we could take that item excluding that one element, for which I'm more than happy to leave the room and let other members decide, and would suggest that anybody else in the room that's got private, we take advice from Mr. Clifford clearly through you, but any other members that have private rented properties might want to understand their position. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for that.
Please. Sorry.
Mr. Clifford, could you clarify on that, please?
Certainly. So through you, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused about this. This is the General Purposes Committee meeting, is it not? And have we not got the 2 items on the agenda for the 2 matters to go for recommendation to the Emergency Committee later on?
Yes, I don't recognise the reference to private rented property. Councillor Whiting, are you talking about GP or are you talking about Emergency Committee? Yep. Mr. Clifford,
yeah, it's item 6, Chairman.
Yeah, item 6. It's a reference to delegated powers. I don't really think this rules the member out of being in attendance at the meeting because a particular power is delegated to a particular officer. I don't think there's any interest, a conflict of interest, but do you understand what the member's asking now?
I do now, Chairman. Thank you. Apologies for the confusion. I agree with you. I don't think that gives the member a conflict of interest.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate the clarity.
All right.
Thank you.
Sometimes, yes, but I normally politely look at people who have just spoken to me. So, Councillor Baldock, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I'm just registering the same concern as Councillor Whiting, but I'm appreciative that we've now had that concluded.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to the two items that we do have to discuss. And as Mr. Clifford said, we need to discuss these as GP, and then they'll go to the emergency committee. So the first item is the constitutional amendment, the delegation to the chief executive. Councillor Baldock, would you like to introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's a fairly straightforward item. It enables, well, basically it's to enable the working of the council. There is a wording at 3.1 which we are proposing be inserted into the constitution, but I would appreciate input and comments from the committee and visiting members regarding this, and yeah, their thoughts.
Okay, I mean these are delegated powers to be used in extremely unusual situation and in emergency, and we would hope limited to items of less weight than some that the council have to determine. So you're proposing recommendation 1, and have I got a seconder? Councillor Martin. Has anybody got any questions? I'm looking around the whole chamber to make sure I don't miss anybody. So here we go. So we'll have Councillor Whiting.
Thank you, Chairman.
If I don't make the list. Sorry. Councillor Simmons, Councillor Palmer, and I thought I saw Councillor Horton put his hand up. So, Councillor Whiting, off you go.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll start by saying I don't think these measures are necessary to deal with the pandemic as it currently exists. I think that the changes in the way the pandemic is progressing or receding, depending on what side of the optimism fence you sit, mean that we don't actually need these. I also believe they put officers in a very difficult position, because there's no clarification within the documents as to how their decisions, and they will be their decisions, will be scrutinised by members. And I feel that we will be putting officers in a difficult position to be scrutinised by members within the scrutiny committee. And remember, we could have a scrutiny committee every day of the week to understand the officers' decisions. What I'd like, Chairman, having set out that sort of broad objection to taking this forward and to scrapping it, I would suggest, if it's within your with your agreement, that we actually take this report paragraph by paragraph, rather than simply ask members to speak for 5 minutes on the whole report and then come back to it. And I think that might be a more expedient way to deal with this matter. But again, that's entirely at your discretion, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Just to say in response to that, you're right, it is at my discretion. I think that would be extremely long-winded. And I think any member who's read this and has a particular concern about any particular paragraph can draw attention to that. But thanks for giving me some guidance on
with your permission, then, Chairman, will I be allowed to come back with the comments I'd like to make on the report?
Oh yeah, of course,
during the debate. Thank you.
Okay, of course. Let's have Councillor Simmons next.
Gosh, well, thank you, Chairman. A couple of comments first of all. In paragraph 2.7, it talks about about the difficulty of in Swale because there are a high number of small groups. I mean, effectively, really, there are only two groups. There's the administration and there's the Conservatives, and I just sort of make that comment. I'd like to ask a question on paragraph 3.1, which Councillor Baldock has proposed, and for some clarification, please. And it's the sentence which is in brackets, for which I would like some clarification, and that sentence is save for any decision expressly reserved to full council under statutory or regulatory provisions. Now, my interpretation of that is that it is the decisions that are, I think, commonly known as Part A minutes, which normally have to be taken by council. So that most of those decisions can't be covered by this delegation. I just want to be sure that I'm right, because in a way that to my mind is really one of the reasons why we perhaps don't need this solution, and perhaps we can find a better solution, which no doubt I or my colleagues can present in a moment. So if I get an answer to that, what I do think about this is that even if we do agree it, and I don't think we need to, because I think there's a different and better way of doing it. I would like to see it have a time limit written into it, presumably because we are moving to a committee system and rewriting the constitution. This would be out of the window, as it were, at the annual meeting, the annual council meeting, which is, I don't know, sometime I think in the first half of May. I can't remember the exact date. So I do think it should have in the report some sort of a sunset clause, which does actually spells out that this is only until that time. I think, as I said, I don't think this is necessarily the best way of doing it, and I'm wondering whether one of the problems is that the meeting which we're about to have after this one, the emergency committee, is that in some ways the emergency committee is sort of misnamed, because it seems to be only in sort of serious emergencies, and whether that vehicle could be used as a decision maker for ratifying decisions which have been made by council, rather than delegating it to an officer, which I think has disadvantages. Whoever the officer is, I think it puts the officer in a difficult position. And so I think I'd like to see some sort of mechanism whereby the council as a whole can meet and make an indicative decision, which can then be ratified by the emergency committee. And I'm quite happy to see the emergency committee renamed if that would work. So that's sort of broad outline of what I'm suggesting, Chairman, but I would like an explanation about the paragraph, the sentence in the middle of paragraph 3.1. Thank you.
So I think David can answer the question about Part A minutes. The suggestion that you have, you use the word ratify a decision. The reason that we're doing this is because a decision can't be ratified, the decision has to be taken. So in the event that the emergency committee meet discuss, take on board what's been said at a virtual meeting, in the same way that this delegation to the chief executive means the chief executive must make that decision, in the same way an emergency committee, be it called whatever it was called, needs to make the decision, which could be different from the indicative vote. So if your proposal is that it were to ratify a decision taken online, that's not lawful. If your proposal is that it is to take a decision taking into account what's been said online, but debating it and considering other options in the same way as this report suggests that the chief executive would, then that would be lawful. But David can answer the bit on Part A minutes. Oh.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, if the emergency committee could meet, then this process wouldn't be appropriate, because it requires it to be impractical for a committee to meet. So that would negate the suggestion. I do think that there is some validity in the points that are being raised here regarding why we're having to do this, and we have to remember that we're being put in this position by the government's failure to bring back the temporary bill that they had last time, which allowed us to continue working more effectively. I don't think the sunset clause is necessary, because as you say, the whole constitution is subject for review at or before the annual meeting, and those members of the working group, and I think two of you are on that working group, will be inputting to that quite extensively. And regarding the Part A reports, I think you're quite right that that is what is covered by that paragraph in the brackets, and we would not be able to delegate those decisions to an officer, because as it says, it is statutory or regulatory required that a full council do it. And in the absence of the previous temporary legislation, we would have to continue to take decisions as a full council. You can't delegate that to somebody else.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I appreciate that yourself and officers and the chief executive try and do things in the best interests of safety of people, but I do feel that the pandemic is actually coming to an end. This is a bit like closing the stable door at the end as the horse is disappearing out. I feel maybe we should have had something like this, and going forward, maybe it should be something to look at. But I think the pandemic, and I'm not an expert, but who called, if you look at paragraph the 3.1, paragraph 3.1, in emergencies, who classes an emergency? Because is it the government who say this is a pandemic, we've got to lock down and we're going to introduce legislation? Or do we become experts and decide that, well, the government doesn't know what they're talking about, we better, that might actually be true, but I just feel that the government with the vaccine rollout have said, work from home if you can. And we're leaders in our community, and there's many people whose jobs depend on trying to go out and work in a COVID safe way as possible. Restaurants, pubs, clubs, loads of places have put in measures to make sure that their staff and visitors are as safe as possible. And I don't think really, I think we should have been having full council this evening. And I think the pandemic is hopefully, because of the vaccine rollout in the UK and the take up, that's what I would be pushing, to encourage people as far as possible, but without any force or coercion. And then, so in emergencies, what is classed as an emergency? Because if the government can meet, and let's face it, I saw Parliament on TV yesterday at lunchtime. I think it was the Paymaster General, and the opposition benches were quite full. So they didn't seem to have a problem meeting in an enclosed building. There's many organisations, many employers who can't work from home. And I think the rules that the government say, but after the emergency bit, it says any other circumstances. Well, I'd appreciate a definition of what is any other circumstance, because that could be quite loosely interpreted. And then my other question is, who decides what the emergency is and who decides these circumstances? Because I just feel we are acting in the best interest, and I can appreciate how you're acting in the best interest, in the interest of safety. But I do feel, and I'm praying that this we're out of the wood, the pandemic, and people have been vaccinated. There's not so many people dying. Yes, there are fatalities. But then again, in 2017, 2018, the NHS nearly fell to bits because of the flu outbreak. And there's no difference. I used to work in the NHS in the 80s, in the early 90s, and I can tell you when it comes to winter, it is a struggle. And I feel that they probably are coming to burnout, and it's been a very hard time for them, and they've shown a commitment and struggled through. But I just feel at the end, to bring this measure in isn't called for at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Horton, I'll bring you in. I see you're writing notes anyway, so I'll give you leave to do that. But if I'd just like to get this into proper context. We're discussing this because the emergency is that we're not having a full council meeting. And in those circumstances, there were decisions, minor ones, that had to be determined, and therefore the way for us to do that without really diminishing the role of councillors was to do it this way. It was the decision of the mayor that we would not have a council meeting, and that is why we have an emergency. And that's what emergency means, actually. It doesn't mean a state of emergency. It means the emergency committee meets when the full council cannot meet, and that's why the emergency committee has to meet this evening. You're quite right that we're not experts, and we're not experts one way or the other. So we don't know what's coming. We don't really know what the situation is. What we do know is, as of now, there's over 1,500 people per day in Swale contracting coronavirus, which absolutely dwarfs the figures we had some time ago. We have public assurances, which we can only wait to see whether they're true, that the variant is less offensive to people's health, but we don't know that. So something like 1 in 100 people is getting it. And if we crowded 61 people into this council chamber, which is overcrowded, which is not properly ventilated, then the risk of somebody spreading it to quite a large number of people is considerable. So the mayor decided that we would not have the 12th of January council meeting. And to be absolutely frank, there wasn't anything on the agenda that was absolutely crucial, and therefore that also made it legitimate, really, to not have the council meeting. It's a one-off situation that was made, a decision was made when we were in the early stages of this present wave, so we didn't know what the outcome would be. And as I say, we don't know what the outcome would be. So for members here to say, I think it's all over, is really not based on scientific and medical knowledge. 379 people died of coronavirus yesterday, or that's what's reported. So, you know, that is several plane crashes. And if we had several plane crashes on a day, that would be something to cause enormous alarm within the community. So we're not having a council meeting this evening. That's regrettable that we don't give the opportunity to members, but there's a balance to be had. And our concern was for the safety and health of members and the safety and health of officers. The mayor did not make the decision in isolation. Leaders were consulted, and the leaders were in favour. I understand that Councillor Horton, well, the chief executive did say that I asked her to discuss it with you. She said that she did discuss it with you, and you expressed a reluctance for members to use the council chamber. We've got quite a few people in the council chamber this evening. So that was the background to that. And all this proposal is a means for us to have some decisions made that are necessary to be made, such as the extension for members and also the audit report. So there are things that are not of crashingly significant importance to all members. Later on, if we go to emergency, we will be looking at the Treasury Management Report. In all the time that I've been on this council, hardly any member ever says anything about the Treasury Management Report, except when we had a very self-conscious man called Councillor Bowden, who spent a lot of time talking about it to demonstrate his expertise, none of which we could actually challenge because we didn't have that expertise. So we're not passing on to the chief executive decisions that probably would not have been easily agreed if we were having a full council meeting. Councillor Horton, I just think we're making a constitutional thing of this when it's a well-prepared proposal by our officers to enable us to ensure that one or two decisions that if we didn't have them agreed would be embarrassing for us, and that made it possible for us not to have a full council meeting this evening. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the courtesy of allowing me to speak at your meeting. I've got quite a lot I'd like to say, actually, but first of all, I want to commend the thinking that went into this paper. I was, and I think I was notified that council had been cancelled on the 12th. I wasn't asked about whether I wasn't involved, given the opportunity to take part in that decision. I think that for me would be, and if the chief executive's recollection of the meeting is different, then I apologise. But my recollection was I was told it had been cancelled, and I accepted that, and I accepted the rationale behind it being cancelled, and I respect the mayor for having done so. I respect and admire the thinking that went into the preparation of this paper, but that took place in early December. In early December, the world genuinely was in fear of a new variant of COVID that was starting to spread across the world in a frightening way. Governments responded with lockdowns of their airports, didn't want it coming into the country, and there was a significant air of panic and fear across the globe. And in that light, I was consulted on this proposal, and I said I thought it was a good idea, because if we went into where it looked like we would be going, we would need a mechanism to make decisions. It's interesting that there is actually already a mechanism for the making of decisions which can't be taken by full council. It's called the Emergency Committee, and we're going to have it in about an hour's time. And all of the decisions that we're talking about we could defer to the chief executive could very easily be taken by an emergency committee. The difference is there'd be 6 of us in a room instead of the 1 person if we devolved it to the chief executive. There is at least 1 meeting we have to have, and we will have to have it off-site, and we've done it before, and we can do it again. The issue at the heart of this is about democracy. We are elected here to represent the community, and it is councillors who should, in my view, take the decision. There is a deficit in democracy if 6 of us, and it would involve me and it would involve Councillor Simmons, if 6 of us take the decision for 47. But we already have that in the Constitution and we can do it. But actually, we would want to have a good view on the thoughts of those 47. But if the Emergency Planning Committee or the Emergency Committee take the decision is taken by councillors. And that's what we're here for. I see all sorts of difficulty in a chief executive, paid officer, taking decisions which should be made by councillors. There's also a bit of a paradox. 6 people, we could argue, well, actually, we don't really want 6 people in this room, but we're going to have planning in here where about 25 people sit in this room. So I don't think that's a sustainable argument. Part A decisions do need to be taken by council. There is no law to prevent us meeting and holding a meeting. There was when we were taking remote meetings last year, and I agree entirely with the proposal on this paper. We shouldn't be here. We should have been given the powers to conduct our business properly. I totally agree with that, but we haven't. We have to deal with what we've got. And I actually think we have a perfectly reasonable mechanism to do so at the moment. If we wanted to add democratic contribution from the whole council to that, we could do it, because if we're going to meet as a council and have an indicative vote, which is then listened to and considered by the chief executive, we can hold the same meeting, have an indicative vote and ask the emergency committee to make the decision. And then it is made by councillors and not by the chief executive. So I think the planning was right. I think the solution was right, but I think the world has moved on, and I do not now believe that we need to do this. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, yeah, I'll bring you in. There are other people queued. So that's and Harrison. Yeah, just as chief executive.
Sorry, yes.
Just to say, I was very clear when leaders of the opposition said that they supported the cancellation of the meeting in January. We were very clear that we wanted the leader of the opposition to be consulted too.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm not very good at dates, but I'm quite good at days. I met with the informal cabinet on the Monday, and we discussed this matter and also the matter, so the idea of decision making and also cancelling full council. The leader asked me to speak to the leader of the opposition. I spoke to the leader of the opposition on Tuesday. My recollection of the conversation is he's probably correct. I probably told him that the plan was to cancel the meeting, and the leader of the opposition said that he was at the time supportive because it was part of a wider discussion about this. So I think in true officer style, both are accurate. The leader did ask me. I think the error comes in that I didn't say we were considering, what do you think? Do you want me to go back with anything? I said, actually, this was something we were doing. And because the leader of the opposition didn't say, I have a real problem with that, the matter just moved on. So I think I could have been clearer. And to both the leader and the leader of opposition, I apologise for that.
Okay.
Leader, if I may, I don't think that there's an apology necessary.
No,
the conversation was perfectly reasonable. And ultimately, of course, however you put the mechanics around it, it is the mayor's decision, and I respect that.
Yeah. And that decision is not on actually an agenda item this evening. That's not actually what we're discussing. So Councillor Whiting, then Councillor Martin, then Councillor Baldock, Councillor Harrison, and then given that we are convening the emergency upper six, I'm going to take a vote after those people have spoken.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Much obliged for being allowed to come back. I do really think this is a hammer to crack very, very small nut. I mean, I don't know. I asked for the forward plan, and Democratic Services kindly provided it to me. All the items in the forward plan are to be decided by Cabinet, and Cabinet will continue to meet. There are no controversial items. There are no uncontroversial items that any other committee is expected to make a decision on. We know that the Part A items, including the budget, including one or two other things, will come to full council and will need to come to full council. We know that the constitutional changes in advance of May will need to come to full council and can't be delegated. So we're talking about Part B decisions, and I'm struggling to find which Part B decisions this decision, if the emergency committee takes it this evening, will actually be will be putting this major change, and it is a major change to our constitution, what decisions the chief executive might be asked, if any, to decide upon. And my view is that she won't be asked to decide on any at all. JTB goes to Cabinet, they decide, or it goes to KCC, they decide. And I really do not see the need for the changes that are proposed. I think the report, as Councillor Horton has said, is well written, well considered, and well thought out. But there are some elements in it. There's some very woolly elements where we talk about things being necessary, but not necessarily well defined as to what that means. We can hold cabinet meetings. We've done full council meetings as we have before in Faversham and Sittingbourne. And I guess that we'll do that in the future. But to pick up Councillor Palmer's point, who is deciding that a meeting is not the right way forward, and that we should go down this route as suggested in the paper? That seems to me to be unclear in the paper as to who will make that decision.
Okay,
and I think that could be a political decision for some expediency, which I would want to object to. It refers to this additional weapon, and I just wonder who will fire and charge up that additional weapon, because it won't be members of the opposition, I can assure you of that. It will be others. But I struggle, Chairman, to find out why we are doing this and why we are wasting. I've got your point. You got my point, but
and it's getting quite.
But in 3.4, for example, it talks about it would probably be necessary. It would probably involve. There is no definition around the word probably, and that builds on Councillor Palmer's
probably, is there?
Palmer's point. Sorry, Chairman, am I allowed to speak or not?
You are, but I'm asking you to wind up.
I'll wind up by saying that I do not believe this measure is necessary. I believe there are perfect, as Councillor Horton has said, there are perfect instruments within the Constitution that would allow this council to make any decisions using the emergency committee if that was absolutely necessary. But my question would be to the chief executive, to yourself and anybody else, what emergency decisions are you foreseeing between now and May? And I support, and I would propose, if I may make a proposal in support of Councillor Simmons, that any change, if we were to make one, should be time limited until the end of the civic year. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, the sort of decisions that we're talking about are the ones that are on the emergency agenda for later on. Right. Councillor Martin, I'd like to hear you first.
Thanks, Chair. So, where this comes from, let's have let's go back, shall we? If you look at some of our other councils in this country, Chelmsford is a prime example. They introduced this measure many months ago, probably when we should have introduced it, in order to enable decisions to be made. One of the factors that is of concern, and I do point out in 3.1, it is when a council, cabinet or a committee is unable to meet. Now, if the emergency committee is able to meet, this can't be used. But if we go back a few weeks, I'm not sure whether we would have been able to get an emergency committee that was quorate. I know certainly no one from my group would have been able to turn up because pretty much all of us had COVID and one was shielding. straight away that's your democratic mandate removed from most of the people in Faversham. You can have substitutes if you have somebody in your group available to substitute. As I'm pointing out, Councillor Whiting, over the Christmas period, I had COVID, my deputy had COVID, I had one member who was isolating and another member who was vulnerable. We wouldn't have been providing anyone for the emergency committee straight off the bat. Can we be certain that that something like that will not happen where you end up with only 2 people present? I don't think we can. This is an emergency measure for when there is a serious emergency. If the emergency committee can meet, it can't be used. It's as simple as that. It's just giving the chief executive the ability to make a decision in consultation with members when we are unable to make that decision because we're unable to meet. It's a plausible one. Now, we don't know what's going to happen between now and the end of the civic year. We don't know whether the Floronavirus, as it's been dubbed, that's been found in Israel, where coronavirus has merged with the flu virus, whether that's going to be our next pandemic and how harsh that will be. We don't know what the next variant will be at the moment. And realistically, we might sit here thinking, great, you know, the UK's vaccine rollout has been fantastic, and it has. I'll give credit where credit's due. But that's not necessarily where new variants emerge. New variants will emerge in areas of the world where populations aren't necessarily well vaccinated, and we've seen how slow the government has been to react when a new variant does emerge elsewhere to close the borders and actually make people isolate. Omicron was well through the country before we even thought about closing the borders with South Africa. So, you know, we don't know what's coming. We know most of the world is not fully vaccinated. We know that we're not getting vaccines to other parts of the world at a reasonable rate. We know that the southern hemisphere will be coming towards their winter as we come to our summer. We know that some of those areas in the southern hemisphere are the ones that are quite slow to vaccinate, and there is a possibility of a new variant coming out of that area. We don't know if we're going to have to use it, but it's a tool that's there if we have to, only if we have to. We hope we never have to.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to address some of the points that were raised in respect to the report. Not sure why, because I had already made the points and they weren't obviously taken in the first time. We can keep talking about how good it is to have an emergency committee. Well, I agree. That's why we've got an emergency committee tonight. This is in the event that we can't even hold an emergency committee. We don't, Councillor Horton quite rightly said, this was relevant in early December. We don't know what will be relevant in early February. I don't think it's a good idea or a good approach to wait until another, in the event of another emergency erupting, to decide, well, maybe we should do something about it. This is putting it in its place in the event that happens again, and we can actually continue the business work of the council. And I don't really think we want to sit there waiting to find out whether or not there is something that is a plan B that is appropriate, or to highlight them all beforehand, and then find out, well, we decide we don't need to do that unless we find out there is something appropriate, and then find there is something appropriate and we haven't got anything in place. I think it's very, very woolly thinking to take the attitude that we don't need to do this, or we don't know if we'll need to do it at some point in the future, and then wait until that emergency or that decision needs to be taken and decide, oh, actually, maybe we should have made a decision to enable us to make that decision. I actually came into this with some concerns, and the stuff that I've heard tonight has just made me realise just how important we actually get this through, because the alternatives would be to sit there sitting on our thumbs, waiting for it, and then it would be too late. So thank goodness it's this administration that's actually going forward and taking control of the business of the council. I'm sorry if there's other debates wanting to carry on. You go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of points. Firstly, I have a history of not liking delegations to officers you know, many years of experience at it, but I think in this instance it is necessary. I really think people are making a mountain out of a molehill here. And reluctantly, because I don't like delegations, I agree with Councillor Martin. Actually, this should have been done months ago. Now listen very carefully. Do not go out unless it's absolutely essential. Now, I'm not talking about COVID. I'm talking about something which comes up quite regularly. Unfortunately, when the island was cut off, I didn't have a council meeting because we physically could not get off the island. We didn't have choppers. So for a whole week, not one member, well, not one person on the Isle of Sheppey could get off. Well, four-wheel drive people could, and boat people could. But we were very lucky. There were no council meetings at that time. But I recall every year the police used to say, do not go out unless it's absolutely essential. Now, with this climate change, which is extremes in weather, touch wood, it never happens, but we could well get that again, where the island's cut off, where Faversham people can't get in. Do you think that'd be okay if you have a meeting in Sittingbourne for those people who live in Sittingbourne? Do you think that'd be democratic? Because I damn well don't. So, you might think, oh, COVID is going, it's all fading away. But I don't actually see this about COVID. I see it as something we should actually have had on the books. Let's say ad infinitum, but on the books for a long while. And certainly once the government said we ain't changing the legislation, we ain't not bringing in any other legislation, you've got to go and meet in person. I think we should have done something then. But as I say, I don't see it as purely relating to COVID. I see it as when there are emergency situations. And why should people risk their life? Forget COVID. Why should people risk their life getting in a car and driving over to Swale House when the police are saying it's too dangerous to drive? Don't go out unless it's absolutely essential. But, some people think, oh no, we've got to have a council meeting because it's democratic. Well, I don't think it's worth risking your life over. Thank you, Chair.
That I take the vote after Councillor Harrison. We've had nearly 50 minutes on an item that really is just to give us a resource if we need it. I accept there is a minor democratic impact, but we have to set that against the reality of situations. And if one of those realities is a genuine concern that we would actually be risking the health of members and officers, then that's a balance to be drawn. So I said we'd take a vote, but Councillor Simmons can have the last word, and then we'll take the vote.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's really, I'd like a point of clarification, because both Councillor Martin and Councillor Baldock have said that this delegation in 3.1 will only be used if the emergency committee cannot meet. I don't see that anywhere in the general purpose paper at all. If it's not in there, and I don't believe it is in there, I'd suggest that the recommendation is amended to say that it is only to be used when the emergency committee cannot meet. And I'd also suggest that it should be time limited to the end of this civic year, so that we don't run on. But I do think that's an important point of clarification, Chairman. Two members of the committee have said it, and I don't believe it's in the recommendation.
Chairman, I'd second that amendment. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, with respect, the emergency committee is a committee, and it says where circumstances make it impractical for the council, cabinet or a committee to meet. Which bit of committee did you not read?
Okay, I think Councillor Harrison has given you the clarification that you seek. Right.
Chairman,
I'm going to take a vote.
Table, Chairman.
Sorry?
Are you not accepting the amendment?
We're,
it's on the table and been seconded.
yes, okay. The amendment is for a time limit. Okay, can I have those in favour of the time limit? Go on, sorry, Councillor Baldock.
Well, as it's an amendment, as I say, this will expire when the new constitution is brought in May. So that is effectively a time limit. There is going to be a new constitution to deal with a whole new system of the way the council works, and Councillor Simmons and Councillor Ingleton will both be having input into the way that constitution comes forward, and it will have to be voted on by the council. And if this is going to be in it or not will be a matter for discussion then, but it can't just be carried through. So it is effectively dead then anyway.
Councillor Whiting.
Can I speak to the amendment? Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate that. And I agree very much with what Councillor Baldock has just said. But the point being made by Councillor Simmons is very clear, that those two promises, woolly as they are, don't actually appear in writing. And it would be very simple to include a line in the proposal that we send to the emergency committee that there will be a sunset clause, so that this whatever is agreed by the emergency committee does come to an end at the end of the civic year. And it would be very easy also to include a line that said that decisions will be delegated to the emergency committee unless and will only be delegated further to the chief exec if the emergency committee is not quora. And I think that's perfectly in line with what the spirit of the paper suggests, but it actually then lays it down so that officers have got a very steer clear about how they move forward with this, should the emergency committee approve it. Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Clifford, would you come in and give us some clarification on that? My reading is that is implicit in this, but would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the committees to which this recommendation relates, it's not just about council and the emergency committee. So the emergency committee can only take decisions on behalf of council. The idea of the delegation is that the chief executive could take a decision on behalf of council or the cabinet particularly. It also says or a committee. So I think Councillor Martin made the point about if all of his group were unable to attend a meeting because of COVID, then they wouldn't be able to send a rep to the emergency committee. That's also true, of course, for cabinet, and on cabinet you can't have subs. So the intention behind this was to have a mechanism where routine, non-contentious decisions that need to be taken could be taken in a situation in which cabinet or a committee or the council could not meet. Thanks.
I think that makes it much more clear. Okay, I'm going to take a vote on the recommendation. On the amendment, sorry, on the amendment. Those in favour of the amendment, members of the GP, those in favour of the amendment, and those against. Okay, that wasn't passed. Now the recommendation which Councillor Baldock proposed, we did have a seconder, didn't we? Yeah. Those in favour, and those against. Okay. And an abstention? Councillor Ingleton. All right. Clearly, we don't want to make constitutional changes without necessity, and it's right that we should have a profound discussion. But as we said, this is a resource to be used in very unlikely circumstances, but the circumstances that we are in are unlikely circumstances. So agenda item 6 for this meeting, the GP. Councillor Baldock, would you like to propose this, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is a necessary set of changes to reflect the recent changes in the staffing structure. There are 3 recommendations. I'd be interested to hear what members have to say about this.
Have we got a seconder? You're proposing that? Can I have a seconder? Councillor Martin, do you want to add anything? No, okay. I think this is all pretty straightforward and inevitable, but maybe we can have a discussion about it. Councillor Whiting.
Thank you. I'm sure it is all straightforward and inevitable, but I just had a couple of questions, if I may, Chairman. I just wondered under recommendation 2, whether Mr. Clifford could clarify for me the meaning of the words further minor amends and what minor means in respect of this, because I couldn't see it displayed elsewhere in the paper. Under 3.2 on page 12 of our papers tonight, it talks about updating job titles. From personal experience in private industry, updating somebody's job titles and their responsibilities, despite what the Constitution may say, can end you up in a tribunal. And I just wondered whether employment law does in fact impact on what is being proposed, that we can simply update job titles as and when we want to. With regard to the signing off of grants, my understanding was that these were signed off by the cabinet member, the relevant cabinet member, and not necessarily by officers. And I'd just like some clarification on that. And when it comes to decisions by officers under the delegation, I just wonder where the member oversight and scrutiny sits with that, and what facilities there are to ensure that members do have an oversight of some of these delegated decisions. Thank you, Chairman.
Ask Councillor Baldock to respond, and maybe Mr. Clifford can respond as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think the council makes a very valid point regarding recommendation 2. And if he was to propose that it be removed, I might be tempted to second him.
I therefore propose. Thank you.
Mr. Clifford, any comments?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this is literally about not having to have an appendix hundreds of pages long with very, very, very minor and repetitive updates in it. I just thought it would be simpler to say that where somebody's job title has changed from Director of Regeneration to Director of Neighbourhoods and Regeneration, I would make those sorts of changes. That's the definition of minor in this context. I hope that clarifies.
Okay. What is it you want to propose?
Well, I did have concerns about this, and I think the point that Councillor Whiting has made about employment litigation, employment tribunals is a valid one. Yeah, I had this question marked. If it was to be amended to take in consultation with the cabinet member or consultation with the leader, I would be happier with that. Or alternatively, scrap recommendation 2, but I do think that would require a fair degree of other work to be done.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to second that, Chairman, if I may. But as long as there's a proviso in there that post May, it's not just a cabinet member, it may be the cabinet,
Yeah,
it
exactly.
may be the committee chairman or whoever. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to respond? I'll bring you in, guys.
So just to say, as David has, the thing that I don't think David did say though is when it's things like such as a management restructure, the senior management restructures do come to General Purposes Committee first and then are agreed often by full council. So what happens is there is often it's agreed, and in the delegation was given to me in the last management restructure to make minor amendments, which was about, is it Director of Neighbourhoods and Regeneration or Regeneration and Neighbourhoods? And to this day, I still can't remember which way round we agreed it. But I have to look at Emma's signature. However, I think it's to have it in consultation with the portfolio holder or the leader or the chair of the committee is fine. I think the purpose of this is not to try and do things without people knowing what it is. It's to stop having lots of appendices that in reality there is little reason for members to look at, because you know, it just isn't.
All that seems really sensible, in fact, and just makes the situation clearer. Councillor Horton, Councillor Simmons, quickly if you can.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a very pragmatic and very practical addition to the change. It's the Constitution is a living document. Laws change. There are all sorts of minor alterations. Somebody finds a spelling mistake. We don't expect a committee to decide that we're going to put the right word in. We need to have a level of trust in our officers that they understand what a minor alteration to the Constitution is. If it fundamentally makes any difference to the reader, then we might want to get involved, and I'd be very comfortable with the referring it to the chair of the committee that deals with the Constitution in the future. But to require it to come to General Purposes Committee for every minor alteration or whatever, we are just creating a bucket load of work that the General Purposes Committee doesn't need.
Okay, so should we make that minor amendments number 2 to say to give authority to the monitoring officer in consultation with appropriate members to make further, so you know it'll take 10 seconds for an agreement to be made. But taking that on board, do we agree with the 3 recommendations?
Sorry.
Everybody agreed, yeah. Excellent, that's good. All right.
You did say you were going to ask me to speak, Chairman, but there we are.
I did, but you joined the extensive club of people who I unwittingly ignore. Ask Councillor Baldock or Councillor Harrison, and you see you're in distinguished company now. You can never tell what the subconscious does. Councillor Simmons, have a word.
Go on. I'll have a word. As the meeting's finished, I'll have a word. I had a question and then a comment. The question was, at the start of the meeting, you said that the meeting may be recorded. I'm not sure whether you said it would be recorded or not. I don't notice the red light on, and I see in the blurb it says that all or part of the meeting may be recorded. I don't know whether it was recorded. It is recorded.
It has been and is still being recorded.
Jolly. Okay. The other thing the comment I wanted to make, Chairman, was in 2.1. It talks about Swale and a typical council. I mean, I should confirm straight away that I was totally in agreement with the chief executive looking into her into the structure of the council, and you and she gave myself and Councillor Horton the courtesy of telling us what the plans were. And incidentally, congratulations to the chief executive, who's just this week completed, in fact yesterday, completed her first year at Swale. What I can all right, success. What really the question is, you know, why isn't Swale a typical council? Because I think it probably is a typical council. We can spend hours discussing minutiae and 2 minutes discussing important things. But anyway, there we are. That's slightly started end to the meeting.
Yeah, it's it's an extremely important question. We'll put it to the next meeting.
I thought it was because we wanted to be exceptional.
Exactly, we are. We'll close the meeting, and then in due course we'll start the emergency committee meeting.
Can you open the next meeting and adjourn it for 5 minutes?
So,
It's been advertised. We need to.
okay, are the members here?